Good afternoon, Ministers, and welcome to the Transport Select Committee. Mr Djanogly, could you tell us why the government decided to ban referral fees in personal injury cases against the advice of the Legal Services Board?
Well, good afternoon, Chairman. Firstly, I wish to declare interest. Should I do that now? Yeah. So I wish to declare all relevant disclosures made in my entries in the Register of Members' Interests and the Ministerial Register. In particular, I mention any interest I may have as a non-practising solicitor who has not received any payment under the legal aid scheme. Can I also declare any interest I may have in the insurance sector? My investment holdings are in the hands of a blind trust, and although I do not know what they are, I know that they did include, and therefore possibly may still include, a minority share in the Djanogly family LLP and various other insurance and financial shareholdings as publicly declared by me to the Register of Members' Interests at the start of this Parliament.
Right, thank you. We've noted that. Could you tell us then why you decided to ban referral fees in personal injury cases when the Legal Services Board had to come out against that?
Yeah. Well, when we came into government, the starting point really on all of this was the report prepared at the instigation of the senior judiciary by Lord Justice Jackson. That dealt with civil costs and other civil litigation issues, but in that report he did include a recommendation for the banning of referral fees. In addition to that, the Prime Minister requested a report to be prepared by Lord Young, and he also suggested a ban on referral fees. At the time when the Legal Aid Bill was in gestation, the Legal Services Board was also conducting a review of referral fees. It wasn't said, well, they didn't recommend a ban, but they basically shifted the decision as to whether to go ahead with a ban onto the underlying regulators beneath the Legal Services Board. On reflection, we thought, having read the Legal Services Board report and taking account of the other reports and public opinion and evidence that we were taking from around the stakeholder communities, that a ban was appropriate. I should say that that has been generally welcomed, and some elements of for instance, our legal aid bill proposals in relation to civil costs are not welcomed by some people who do want a ban. So, for instance, the Law Society don't like our General Jackson proposals in the legal aid bill, but they do like the idea of a ban on referral fees. And basically, our intention is to discourage claims harvesting. And to stop reduce the high costs of litigation and the volume of litigation, which is increasingly becoming a commodity. A claim, for instance, can be sold with a referral fee attached up to 5 times before it actually gets anywhere near a court.
Have you considered referral fees in relation to vehicle repairers or other people who are involved in the merry-go-round of referral fees?
Well, the word merry-go-round is, I think, an appropriate way to describe it. I think it's important to make the general point that we do accept what I think was the finding of your committee last time you looked at this, that referral fees are a symptom of the compensation culture rather than the cause of it. So when we look at things like referral fees, I would put them into the same basket as SMS texting, as garages selling lists, as inducement advertising. All of these are symptoms of what I would call a sick suing culture.
But then why are you only looking at referral fees in relation to lawyers, and you don't seem to be looking to referral fees in relation to other people in that merry-go-round?
We're looking. We are.
There is the car hire companies. Yeah. Are you looking at banning referral fees there?
We are looking at both the receipt and the payment of referral fees. The payment of referral fees by solicitors is the starting point, but we are also looking at the receipt of referral fees too.
And how will this be progressed? When would the ban be?
Well, my hope is that it will be put into the legal aid bill. That has not yet been finally signed off by party managers, but that is what I'm personally pushing for. And of course, what I want to do is to have it go through in that bill because it ties in very cleanly with the civil costs, the other civil cost Jackson provisions, so which I do think should come into play all at the same time for proper effect. And that's an important point if you want to go into the compensation culture aspects of it. I can talk further on that.
Mr. Penning, were you involved in this decision?
Yes, we were.
We discussed this when you came to the committee.
And we're very, very keen, and in the evidence I gave to the committee last time, I said we're very keen for it to give it all the backing to the Minister to get this bill through. It will be part of a package that will start to address the costs of insurance. I say part because there are other issues that we've discussed before, I'm sure we'll discuss today.
Thank you. Mr. Maynard.
Yeah. Are you concerned that the new so-called Tesco law, the alternative business systems that will allow insurers to either purchase or set up their own law firms, will allow your banning of referral fees to still have the desired impact? Or are there any other impacts that you fear might occur as a consequence?
That is a very good and a very complicated question. But and I don't think anyone could give you a firm answer on it because no one quite knows what the impact of alternative business structures is going to be because of the scope of them. However, you are right. I do think that there will be a significant number of claims management companies who, realising that our proposals are going to severely curtail their business, will look to join with solicitors. Now, that, in effect, that would mean that the claims management company would become the advertising arm of the law firm, even though it may own that law firm, which will become possible under the proposals which are due to come into place around the end of the year. However, from a regulatory perspective, I think that would be advantageous, and the reason why is that the claims management companies would then be regulated by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and that would be a very, very significant movement in favour of consumer protection. So I don't actually fear that as a move. I would encourage it.
And just one more, if I may. Prior to the introduction of referral fees, there was an underground market of sorts. How do you think you can prevent that re-emerging also?
That is a key concern of mine. It is a straightforward fact that when referral fees were banned last time, which I think was pre-2004, there was huge leakage. There are many ways that you can get round a straightforward referral fee. I mean, in the simple sense, it's easy. I give you a job, you pay me a referral fee. However, we do know from how it worked in the past that there are many ways that you can get round referral fees. Insurers, for instance, giving work to solicitors on the basis that the solicitors get their insurance off the insurer. Trades unions apparently will give work to solicitors on the basis that they do their low-value work for nothing or for very little, on the basis that they get their high-value work pretty much guaranteed. There are other ways of cutting it. So, for instance, instead of paying a referral fee, you could pay for services and get a fee for the services rather than a referral fee. To what extent those services are actually really undertaken is something that would have to be looked at in the context of the case. As with all of these examples I'm giving, sometimes they may be tied down to referral, sometimes they may be valid services. Which is why I have to say, when we looked at how this should be put into effect, we veered away from a criminal offence. The reason is that with a criminal offence is a very blunt instrument. It's you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt, and the grounds for when something would be a referral fee or not would be very much merged. And I think it would be very difficult for a jury to convict on the basis of the complexity of these arrangements, which is why we came down on the basis of it should be a regulatory offence where the principle of what's happening can be looked at by the regulator and a view taken.
That's it. Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, you said at the beginning in terms of referral fees that they were a symptom rather than a cause of the dysfunctionality of the system. I don't know if you've seen it, but we have a written evidence submitted today from Admiral Group which uses precisely that wording. Do you feel sometimes that you're a bit too close to the insurance company? Because that's almost exactly what they've said to us as well.
Well, I mean, I think that is the case, and I'll explain why I think it's the case. But on insurance companies, no, I don't feel I'm at all too close to insurance companies. Indeed, there seems to be some assumption that what we're proposing is going to help insurance companies. That is not by any means necessarily the case. If, as I hope, the level of claims comes down, and that can be fed through to the consumer so that insurance premiums come down, that will not be to the benefit of insurance companies. And of course, insurance companies themselves are very big earners from referral fees, particularly, by the way, the company that you've given as an example, whose reportedly share price fell on the day that I announced the referral fee ban. So this idea that, and of course the ATE insurance market is going to be, well, it could be ended pretty much totally from our proposals. So the idea that insurance companies are going to benefit from what we're doing is certainly not the case for all insurance companies, and I would say not necessarily the case for most.
I asked Minister, there's a report in yesterday's Guardian that suggests that you met with leading members of the insurance industry on the 19th of January and told them, asked their advice about how best to draft rebuttals to criticisms of government proposals that might arise from its consultation on legal aid reforms. Then you come to this committee and you use a phrase which is identical to one of the bits of evidence that Admiral Group have. You see where I'm going here? It looks like to be a very close relationship.
I mean, with respect, I think if you were going to make the point, you haven't used a good example to make it with. But in relation to the Guardian, I mean, there has been. Let me just put the situation here, because obviously I read the article this morning, and I did have a feeling it may come up today. So I have discussed this within the MOJ, because it mainly relates to the MOJ, of course, rather than to me. And there has been ongoing dialogue between the government and stakeholders with a range of opposing views, and that's an important part of policy making. The story in The Guardian today only covers one stakeholder group whose view was broadly supportive of MOJ's policy on controlling costs in civil cases, not legal aid as reported. The story refers to a meeting with MOJ officials in May this year, at which officials set out the government's policy. There is nothing surprising in that. The government had set out its position clearly and fully in an oral statement to Parliament by the Secretary of State on 29th March. The quotes and interpretations in their emails are their own rather than the MOJ's. And I can confirm that my officials and I have met with a number of organisations from both the claimant and the defendant's side as part of the process of consulting on and implementing government policy. And I would have thought most people would have wanted us to do no less.
I do want to try to keep to the points of concern.
Absolutely. Can I just ask a question on policy then? Is the government going to make illegal the text messaging that Mr Dobbin, for example, referred to as a personal experience? I don't know if that was in an earlier session. People do get these texts saying you could make £3,000 if you phone this number. Are you going to outlaw them?
Cold calling message. I've had them too, Chairman, by the way. I think we all probably have.
It does look as if there is a problem with regulation or absence of regulation, data protection. What's going to be done about that? Okay,
well, I mean, firstly, I think we do need to point out that not all of these texts are necessarily illegal. You may, when you signed up to your insurance, have signed up to small print, which gives them permission, for instance, for them to use text messages, and if they are DPA registered, then it may be done legally. However, a lot of these text messages are illegal. I do see them as another symptom of the compensation culture, the money flushing through the system that's going into referral fees. Some it's going to pay for text messages. Well, the starting point is that if you feel that you get a text message and you want to if you want to report it as a potentially illegal text message, you can do so now by calling the ICO hotline.
Does the government intend to take any new action to deal with this problem?
Well,
Maybe
yes,
telephone calls may not be text messages.
We are, Chairman, we're looking at several ways of doing so. Firstly, we're working with industry, the Direct Marketing Association and others, to see how we can crack down on the use of technology in this way. And I'm pleased to say that in the last month we've reached agreement with a number of major network operators who have now agreed to help with the investigations, actually giving us access so that the ICO and indeed the Claims Management Regulatory Unit at the MOJ can actually get access to who these people are and if they're not registered, if they're texting illegally, we can then investigate. The ICO can deliver very stringent fines, and the MOJ can strike off CMCs that are acting illegally. As, by the way, we struck off, I think, over 250 CMCs in the last year.
Mr. Harris, one more.
Very brief question, Mr. Djanogly, and it follows on from your very first statement to the committee, so I think this is relevant. I just want some clarification. You said that your membership of the Djanogly family LLP was in a blind trust. Is
Yes,
that correct?
Correct.
So you're no longer a member of the Djanogly family LLP, is that correct?
No, my interests are controlled by a third party.
Right, it's just that a member of an LLP does have a fiduciary and statutory duty, so do you have that oversight?
Well, that's my duty to the LLP. It's got nothing to do with Parliament.
Well, it was part of the original statement, Chair.
Yes, okay. The statement was given, I think. Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. In the evidence we've received, it is the compensation claims for whiplash that seems to be a particular problem in fueling this compensation culture. Is the government planning to look at imposing a limit on the value of the claims for whiplash?
Whiplash is a complicated area. Let me start with the easy bit, and that is that there is a growing amount of fraud. People orchestrating crashes, for instance, and then claiming whiplash. That is something that the police and the authorities are generally, more prosecutions are taking place, and that needs to be increased. That's the criminal aspect, if you like. Secondly, we need to appreciate that abolishing the recoverability of success fees and the recoverability of AT insurance premiums is going to suck money out of the market. And we do hope that that, again, will have a significant impact on SMS texting, on inducement advertising, because there will be less money to pay for them, and that in itself will reduce the number of whiplash claims. Thirdly, we need to appreciate that because we haven't had a balanced suing mechanism, if you like, that defendants have been too ready or have really been induced themselves to settle too easily. And so what we're hoping through our other reforms is to create an atmosphere where the insurance defendants will actually want to defend more readily. And from a governmental point of view, we will be, I say today, we encourage them to do so.
Thank you, Chair. Are you intending to cap the fixed fee through the RTA portal?
Yes, I mean,
Or reduce, reduce the fixed fee.
I think in terms of the underlying causes, it goes back to recoverability. But we need to appreciate that if we sort out recoverability, which we're proposing to do in the LASPO bill, we will have less money in the system, but because for small claims, which are claims under £10,000, there are fixed costs, that won't change the amount going through the system at all for small claims. So you're right, we can't get insurance premiums down, for instance, or it would be hard without sorting out the fixed costs as well, or at least that will help the process. So we have initiated that process. I have to say that it's not straightforward. I do believe that there is a notional amount within those fixed costs that is attributed to referral fees. So we want to, in effect, reduce the fixed cost by that amount. However, the legal profession disputes that vociferously and says that, they either say that there is actually no notional amount for referral fees, or that if referral fees are banned, they'll have to spend more on advertising, and therefore they should keep that amount. There's going to be a negotiation there. I mean, last time this came up as an issue, it was in effect brokered by the Civil Justice Council. They may have a role in this again. But I have said to the Law Society that it is not the government's intention to stop referral fees going to claims management companies just so that lawyers can take those referral fees in effect for themselves. We want the benefit of that to feed through to the consumer in lower insurance premiums.
And are you then going to monitor the effect on justice or access to justice for less well-off people. Because what seems to be the thread through this is that whiplash is a sort of non-existent injury, that people are milking the system, etc. But there is a reality that people who do not have the means to actually employ a solicitor in the first place are actually the people who are benefiting from these systems. So are you going to monitor the effect of the reduction on these, on particular groups? It's not just about is there an overall reduction, because actually an overall reduction may not mean that there's an overall reduction in people that are suffering.
We will be monitoring that, but your question actually goes to the heart of this whole issue, and that is the recoverability. So, if you don't mind, Chairman, can I just address that? Because I think it's a starting point, actually. I mean, what happened was that pre-1997, in the last Conservative government, Lord Mackay put in place some proposals which introduced CFAs, no-win, no-fee deals, if you like. But they didn't include recoverability of success fee or AT insurance premiums. It was just a basic CFA. In the 1999 Access to Justice Act, there were some important changes. Firstly, the then government took away legal aid for personal injury. And at the same time, they added recoverability for claimants, for winning claimants, of success fees and AT insurance premiums. That had a huge and dramatic effect. And if I tell you, for instance, that one individual indicated that in 1999, claimant solicitors' costs were equivalent to just over half the damages agreed or awarded at 56%. And by 2010, last year, average claimant costs represented 142% of the sums received by the injured victims. The same person said that whilst average damages paid had increased since 1999 by 33%, average claimant costs paid had increased by 234%. So, you know, that legislation had a dramatic and significant impact on the claims culture. And the problem is that if you are a claimant and you have no chance of losing, then you're almost obliged, you're almost crazy not to sue. Why shouldn't you? And that is the mechanic of the compensation culture. And that is what we're proposing to reverse in our legislation, but basically going back to the Lord Mackay system, as proposed by Lord Justice Jackson, whereby the claimant ultimately has an interest in what they're paying their own lawyer, and in the and will be interested in the outcome of the case.
But isn't that a case now that the rich actually will continue to sue people willy-nilly, but it's actually the people who have less access to solicitors who don't do so, and therefore are more likely then to not receive what they're actually due in terms of an accident that's not their own fault.
It's a very important point. We're not proposing to end no-win, no-fee litigation. We're proposing to take away the success fee element. So in future, you will still be able to go to a solicitor and say, please act me for nothing. And the solicitor will still be able to say, yeah, I'll act for you for nothing, and I'll take, I'll get my cost plus a markup. But that markup will come out of damages rather than from the losing defendant, as happens in every other country in the world, by the way. And that, we hope, will reintroduce a degree of thought to whether you should sue. So I think what will happen is, if it's a blatant case, you'll still easily get a CFA. If it's a marginal case, then you might have to think a bit more carefully, because there could be a downside. But litigation is about risk, and that's where we're heading towards.
Mr. Dominic.
It's probably a question for Mr. Penning. How big a problem is uninsured driving throughout the country?
As I said to the committee last time, it's a really, really difficult situation in the country as a whole. The estimates were, the last time I came here, that there was around about 1.2, 1.3 million drivers on the road that were uninsured. This has a knock-on effect. The police tell me if you're likely to be driving with no insurance, you're likely to be driving with other car documents, and you may well be involved in other criminality as well. And I think there are two different people that just don't think they should insure and don't care about the consequences. There are people that can't afford to insure and take the risk of being taken to court or being caught or not being caught. But it is a massive issue. not just in fiscal terms, but in actually as the country works and the time involved with my own department and the insurers and the police and actually trying to police uninsured drivers. It's a big issue.
Certain areas are highlighted as having being a bigger problem than others, and of course we're aware that Birmingham and Bradford are like that. Why should that be?
Interestingly enough, it's not for me to say why Bradford had there are where areas of social and economic deprivation take place. So the amount of people that drive uninsured, it's a fact, is where we have. The biggest area that we have this is in young people, though, and that goes across the country as a whole, particularly, as I said at the last committee, 17 to 25-year-old boys where insurance is difficult based on risk. And because 17 to 25-year-old boys are more likely, in general, to be involved in an accident than a girl of a similar age. Of course, the European Court has ruled that is illegal, which I think was somewhat of a silly decision, that being polite.
Just on the point of insurance for young people, do you ever see a time when the exorbitant insurance tallies that they have to pay will be reduced?
Yes, I do, and it's happening now. And like my colleague has said, I mean, I've met with the insurers mostly to do with how we can get the insurance down. Now, insurers operate on a profit situation, but if no one insures them, they don't make any money. So they look at the risk. It's for others as in the insurance business to tell you exactly how they calculate that. Sometimes I struggle as well as to how they calculate that. But what is starting to happen just in the insurance side is, for instance, I had an insurer with me the other day that are putting a black box into the insurer's car. And that policy is specifically for younger people. And that box will tell the insurer if they break the speed limit. This is a technology where we are at the moment. And they get a reduced premium. After 2 or 3 times they break the speed limit, they'll get a letter of warning, and then eventually the insurance will be removed from them. But actually, I think that's also a symptom of the problems we've got in teaching people to drive safely for themselves and others, rather than just passing a test, which is another issue that we're dealing with the test and other measures as well. We need to teach people and educate people from a very, very young age that they can enjoy a car or a motorcycle, but actually it's a very dangerous piece of equipment as well.
I can tell my older grandchildren that the insurance premiums will be reduced shortly. Is that right?
Having two teenage daughters that gone through the same process, I know exactly how you feel.
Just a final one on this. Do you think the actual penalties that the courts are allowed to levy are high enough?
I think the levies that they can give is high enough, which is something that the Minister and I are working on now. If you are an imaginary boy or a girl under 25 with 3 points on your licence, and it is without a doubt a risk that they're willing to take at times to go to court or to take the fixed penalty of £200 and the points, because they know they won't lose their licence necessarily, rather than pay for the insurance. Now, the fine could be up to £5,000, so the magistrate can give you a fine up to £5,000. Well, there's no point going back to the point you was like, if you come from a family or you don't have a particularly large income, you give someone a £5,000 fine, that isn't going to work. But what would work is actually if we look at the points much better, because the loss of their vehicle or their ability to drive their vehicle is much more of an incentive to them to adhere to the law, which we know that from crushing where we take the vehicles away, than it is actually giving them a fine, because the fine relates disproportionately wrong to the actual cost of insurance. So this is something that we're working on now with the Justice Department to see if we can get the guidance to the magistrates to actually not just hit them with a fine, and they have to have a fine because they've not paid a premium, but actually to look at whether or not the penalty is more of a deterrent to them. In other words, points on their licence and the loss of their licence.
I don't know if you're aware, Minister, but we with Young Marmalade, a study
yes.
conducted in looking at young people and the very high premiums, and I think a fairly shocking figure, about a third admit they've considered altering the information to get lower quotes. So I
yes.
think it's, and over 20% have considered driving without insurance.
Yes.
So
I've seen the evidence.
And telling, I think on this...
Yeah, just on this point particularly, around points, do you also think that the fact that drivers are not being banned when they've got more than 12 points actually adds to this problem, because there's an increasing number of people that are continuing to be allowed to drive beyond?
Without being rude to the committee, you're dragging them into the territory of judicial decisions. So in other words, what a judge or a magistrate does. That's not for me to decide as a Transport Minister. But it is very difficult for my department and DVLA, who naturally it's highlighted at 12 points that that person would normally have their licence removed. But it is within the legislation for the presiding judge or magistrate to have a degree of autonomy. Personally, I don't quite understand how they get to 20 points without autonomy, but that's a personal view, not a criticism of the relevant judges or magistrates. But it's a good point that you make, and I know that's something that's being looked at as well in the other departments.
And a lot of those driving without insurance are in those cases.
Well, of course, if you drive without a licence, so if you have no licence, the insurance is invalid. So you're driving without insurance immediately. So there's a catalogue of crimes that actually come immediately behind that.
I would just,
Mr.
can I just point out
yes,
that it is for the Sentencing Council to determine how the guidelines for offences. So, but we can have an impact.
I think the point that just so we touch on this, because we must agree on these things, obviously, is that there is the magistrate or the judge does have the powers to allow people to go over 12 points, should they have belief that they should do so. There are some, as you're probably aware, and we know this, up around 20 points. That to me is an issue, but that's for as you say.
Just a question to the Transport Minister. With respect to the referral fees, you mentioned them, but what's your view on referral fees, and how active were you in with the Ministry of Justice in coming to?
Last time I called them ambulance chasers, and my view before I got this job and since I've got this job, and frankly, as a human being, I find it very difficult that people, any organisation would see a profit in someone's injury. I know people deserve compensation if they're injured, but 50% of the claims to the insurance are personal injury claims. Yeah. That's why our premiums are partially so high. There's other reasons, but very rare. So when the minister, obviously we know when we were talked, we pushed. I think it's very, very important that we do it. But it wasn't my department; it was the minister's department, and I was very pleased.
I think there was general agreement across departments that it was the right policy to push ahead with. And I think it's worth pointing out that when the Jackson report first came out, obviously the last administration was in power, and the then Secretary of State Jack Straw welcomed it at the time, although they didn't get around to doing anything about it. But it was welcomed at the time.
Mrs. Sturdy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Most of my questions have been actually asked by Mr. Dobbin, but just to go back on one point on the uninsured drivers point, do you think enough is being done to clamp down on this regional disparity within uninsured drivers? Mr. Dobbin just raised that briefly, but obviously that's having an impact on the cost of motor insurance on a regional level. We heard earlier on in the session the huge disparity with motor insurance on a regional basis and postcodes. Absolutely. So do you think we are really doing enough to tackle the regional disparity? I think
there's a lot more to be done, and we accept that. Of course, a lot depends on how the particular police force in each particular area looks at this particular crime, and all chief constables have priorities set for them by not only by central government but actually by their own police committees, and so some of them would see this as a more of an issue than others. I see it very much as a national issue, because the continuous insurance that we brought in June, which I discussed at the committee last time, has started to develop significant results. The 60% of those that are being contacted that say you're not insured are immediately sworn off the road or insure. 60%. That is higher than what I expected, and I went into this with a very open mind. The insurance companies are now funding a specialist unit within the City of London Police, and for the first time there is a national fraud computer system within the insurer. So we're starting to know who these characters are, etc. etc. But it has to be, one of the things I always say through APCO to the Chief Constable is, this is not a tiny issue. It is a really, really big issue. And actually, where police forces have clamped down on this, they've seen their detection rates in other crimes dramatically increase as well. And I would say that if, in areas, and we'll look very carefully at the evidence that you've been given as well, as to, what work we can do in those areas, particularly because very often we'll pick up vehicles which are not taxed, invariably they're not insured, Predominantly we crush those vehicles now, and the crushing regime is working. People don't want to lose they'll give up everything else, but they hate losing their car. So if that's what I need to do to actually get them to insure, then I'll take the car.
Thank you.
What's the current position on the establishment of a unit to deal with insurance fraud, paid for by the insurance companies?
As I said at the last committee, with the insurers, I asked for things from the insurance, and they've been naturally asking for things from me. I asked for a lot of money from them to do the Continuous Insurance Bureau, which they came up with. The £9 million for the City of London Bureau is a significant amount of money. We are preparing to give them access to the DVLA database, so they will know when someone is taking a quote whether or not that person is actually telling the truth. In other words, whether there's fraud taking place there. I'll be really honest with you, there is issues to do with costs, because there is a cost to DVLA to actually create that porthole, and we're in discussions with the insurers. But as soon as we can get that through, which I think we will be able to do, then they will have that access, and that will start to eliminate intentional and unintentional fraud. And there were two sorts of fraud that takes place. As a dad, I remember my daughter saying to me, "Dad, will you put me on your insurance?" Now, I was absolutely adamant that she was put down as the main driver, because she was, even though it was on the family insurance. But a lot of mums and dads don't, because obviously it has an effect on the premium. But that's fraud, the same as someone saying, "I don't have any points, give me a premium of X." And that's the same. Some of it's intentional, some of it's done for the best possible reasons, but it's still fraud.
When will the new unit start its
I don't have a date, Madam Chair, but I will write to the committee and give you a date. I hoped it would be up and running by now, but we have some technical issues.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For coming and answering questions of both of you. Thank you, Ministers. Thank you.
You can come again.